Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. And we are at the last of the Mage Winds trilogy. So, the thing about the Mage Winds trilogy is that this trilogy, is really, really setting up the next one. And the first of this centerpiece 9, the first trilogy, the Arrows trilogy, was just starting the series. It was just setting the scene. It was saying, here's the story of Talia. And then Mercedes Lackey did a bunch of other things, because she did filling in some of the backstory with producing the Last Herald Mage trilogy with Van Yell, and that was its own thing. That was filling in a blank because she had an offhand reference in Arrows of the Queen, in which she happened to mention this Van Yell guy, and so she did this book that was his story. And the thing about the Winds trilogy, though, is that the Winds trilogy, I think, was really quite clearly written as a setup for the Mage Storms trilogy, which follows, and the Mage Storms trilogy, which was written concurrently with the Mage Wars trilogy. That's really sort of that upcoming trilogy that we're not at yet. That's the finale. There is a postscript at the moment, and it really is just a postscript in the Owl trilogy, but we'll get there when we get there, because the Owls trilogy it's like an epilogue on the whole series. So, Winds of Fury. We left off the last book having ostensibly defeated Falconsbane and gotten him trapped in the void between the universe, in effect, because when you're gating, you're effectively creating a wormhole to another place, and this is like shutting down both ends of the wormhole while somebody is in the wormhole, causing them to just sort of spill out into a sort of a magical subspace area. So what we have with Winds of Fury is we pick up the story of Ancar. Because the thing is, the last we had heard of Ancar in any real seriousness was in By the Sword, that book that is between the Arrows trilogy and this one, the Winds trilogy. Because Ancar was a threat in Arrow's Fall. We have this story where Ancar's father, Alexander, has proposed that Elspeth marry his son, and then Talia and Chris get sent on that mission to basically find out, whether that particular thing should go through. And then we discover that Ancar is a psychopath, and and a whole bunch of things happen. And in By the Sword, the last third is we get Carowin reappearing to face off, that we get Carowin getting to Valdemar and using her mercenaries as well as, all of her tactical and strategic skills to in effect ensure that Valdemar comes out of its fight with Ancar in one piece. And then we're kind of left dangling. And when we start off this trilogy with Winds of Fate, we pick up on the Ancar thread, but effectively quite briefly. Because the bulk of that book is, at least from the Valdemar side of things, is Elspeth making her way to somebody who can teach magic and somewhere she can get mages for Valdemar. And while that is caused by Ancar, he's a bit of a MacGuffin. He's not an opponent. He's not doing things in the book. He's there to provide an impetus for action. In the second book, in Winds of Change, He is there to provide an impetus, but again, he's not really part of the action. In this book, we come back to him, and we finally really hear things from his perspective, which is, of course, villainous and psychopathic and all of that kind of stuff. And this book effectively disposes of Ancar. And in a lot of ways, that is very fundamentally part of the setting up of the next trilogy process, because Mercedes Lackey has an opponent and a setup and so on that she wants for the next trilogy, and it doesn't involve him. He's not part of it. And in the course of this, we get the resurrection of Falconsbane one more time. And the interesting thing is, again, Falconsbane's story about where he came from, what he is, what he did, is once again, it's a setup. It's to set up the next book. Because we discover that Falconsbane is not a guy who was born and who grew up into an evil, powerful mage. What he is the distant, very distant descendant of a mage who existed umpty squillion years ago, and who made sure to have a lot of children, and basically created an ability for him to resurrect himself, that when he died, he would have sort of this magical hideout for his soul to hang out in. And when one of his great descendants were to call fire, that he would, in effect, fling himself into that person's body, murderize their soul, and take over their body. Effectively, he would possess them. And in this particular case, Falconsbane is... and you see how there's a face here in red? That's actually kind of symbolic in a way of the fact that Falconsbane is a person who has taken over someone else's body. So when this is the cover page, the thing is, Elspeth and Darkwind, who have become an item in the last book, are now solidly an item. They are working patrols. They are for Kashana. You know, they're doing their thing. And is we have, you know, these various ongoing stories. So what we have here, though, as I would suspect, at least, it's a little hard to tell because these Larry Dixon pictures, while very nice, are a little abstracted. But I have a feeling that what we've got here is an image of Falconsbane, of the person who Falconsbane took over. Because, of course, when Falconsbane took over the body of one of his descendants, there was a person who was there before. And in most cases, he had shredded their souls and sent them hurtling into the outer darkness. But in this case, Andesha, who is a Shina-in, the thing is, it's also in the course of this book and the last book that we have found out about the history of the Shina-in and the Teledras and where they came from. And because the Shina-in had basically been told by the goddess Kalinel that I will fix up your home, but now your job is to stay here and guard the ancient weapons of the Mage Wars, and none of you guys can do magic. The only ones who are allowed to have anything like magic will be the shamans. But there was an out, because if any child was born with magical power who did not feel called to become a shaman, they were allowed to go and join the Teledras. The difficulty in this case is that Andesha was in an awkward position because he's a teenager, he has magic, and he really doesn't want to become a shaman, but he felt like the shaman of his tribe would basically bully him into becoming one, and that's not what he wanted. And so he said, okay, fine, I'm just going to set out to Teledras lands, and I will find somebody who will take me on as a student, because, that's sort of a thing. They're sister groups. It's totally allowed. And he just kind of ran away from home. But in this case, for whatever reason, Falconsbane, when he took over Andesha's body, didn't manage to kill Andesha. And the going theory was that it was a combination of carelessness and the fact that Andesha fled and hid deep in his own mind. And so what we have here, though, is in this book, we finally get introduced to Andesha. We finally discover that he exists, that he's a thing, and who he is and what he's doing. And Dawnfire and Trevelyan, the Dawnfire from the first book, who got trapped in her Bondbird's body and was rescued by Kalanel to become sort of an avatar, and Trevelyan, who was a Shin'a'in shaman in training, who basically sacrificed his life in order to prevent Falconsbane from assaulting Kashena and basically destroying them all. They had both become avatars of the goddess, and they visited Andesha and promised him a chance, nothing more than a chance, to get his body back and to become his own person again. And so in this particular book, we have several lines of plot going on. We have Elspeth and Darkwind, and Elspeth doing her job as the heir of Valdemar, which she eventually renounces because she, as she points out, not only do people continually doubt her because her father was treacherous and tried to murder the queen and so on, but also she is obligated as the first herald mage to put herself in danger, and the one thing heirs shouldn't be doing is putting themselves in danger. So at some point she renounces it. But anyway, so we have that line and her duty and so on. We have the line of the people traveling with her. Firesong, who doesn't particularly want to go to Valdemar, but gets pushed into it by Vanyel, because we finally hear about what's up with Vanyel, because we know as of the end of Last Herald Mage that Vanyel had decided to take over the Sorrows and hang out there and protect Valdemar's border. But we finally hear back from him. There's a lot of threads that all ultimately come together in the Mage Storms trilogy, and this book, like I said, it's setting it all up. It says, here's Vanyel, here's where he is, here's what he's doing, here's the explanation of why nobody can talk about magic or think about magic ever since Vanyel's death, basically. And he bullies Firesong into going to Valdemar with Elspeth. So, but that's all one line. But we also have what's going on in Hardorn, which is a couple of parallel lines going, because you have Falconsbane and Ancar, who are going back and forth and who are plotting the downfall of Valdemar and so on and so forth. Running parallel to that, simultaneous with that, intertwined with that, is Andesha's story of feeding information to the goddess's avatars, who are then able to feed that information to Need, who can then, when she finally feels like she's got a reliable enough basis, she can feed that information on to everybody who has decided this is actually sort of a composite thing of everybody arriving in Valdemar, as well as a bunch of griffins, that they all decide to go and do a strike to take out Ancar and Falconsbane and Hulda, and basically take out everybody at the head of Hardorn so that they can stop the armies, because Ancar is invading Valdemar again. So there's the setup, and after this we wind up in the Mage Storms trilogy, which is where we get all of this payoff of everything. So I'll see you all next week.